chess friends, and welcome to Jozarov chess channel, and welcome to a very special story that I decided to share with you today. It's a story about my last chess weekend in which I played for my home club Kryževci in the second Croatian league. I played on the first board against the strong international master Milan Mrđa, and in the second game I played against the strong FIDE master Tomislav Chop. The cool part is that I won both of my games, which was really incredible. That was a huge success for me, and of course I wanted to share my happiness with you by showing you my games. I think these games were really good. I don't want to praise myself, of course, but I think they had really decent strategical and tactical elements, and especially in the first one I played the hyper accelerated ranked Sicilian defense against the Maroczy bind. And if you have followed maybe my YouTube chess channel, I have covered this hyper accelerated ranked Sicilian defense, the whole series. I've created there 30 videos with some strategical and tactical elements of this opening, so if you are maybe interested, you can also check it out and maybe have the whole opening prepared. So that's why I think this first game is even more important, because I think it has some most important principles of the Maroczy bind. And I think the Maroczy bind is really weird to play against. Sometimes you get out of this opening very easily, but sometimes then afterwards you don't know what to do. So the Maroczy bind in the beginning doesn't have some tactical threats, so you will probably play in the Maroczy bind 20 moves without even making mistakes or blunders. But then in the continuation it's really hard to find a plan, so that's why I think also that this is a very important video to show. So let's check out now my first game. As I said, my opponent was Milan Mrđa, a strong international master from Croatia. So here he opened with the move e4. My response was c5. We have knight to f3, and I play my favorite opening with the black pieces, the hyper accelerated ranked Sicilian defense. So we have here d4, c takes d4, knight to d4, and now I played knight to c6. And it's very important now here to follow the correct move order, because I prepared a little bit at home and I saw many times that Milan Mrđa is playing the Maroczy bind. So if you are playing, for instance, bishop to g7 immediately, then it's not good to play the game like this, because your opponent can go immediately with the move c4, and he will reach now the Maroczy bind like he wants to get. He can play now knight to c6, and now after bishop to e3 he has a full control of the d4 square. But now notice that in this move order, so just memorize this move order, we didn't challenge the pawn on e4 with the move knight to f6. So that's something that bothered me many times in the Maroczy bind. What you should do after move knight to d4 is now to play the correct move order. So we are playing now without the bishop on g7 move, so you should delay the move bishop to g7. I'll explain you why you should delay it. So first here knight to c6 I played. My opponent is going still into the Maroczy bind structure, but now I played here after move c4 I played knight to f6, so I challenged his pawn immediately. He has to now react, and I still don't play with the bishop, because if I play with the bishop then he will still go with the move bishop to e3. And even if I challenge maybe the bishop like this with the knight to g4 move, it doesn't make sense, because queen to g4, knight to d4, and still here he'll play queen to d1 and he'll kick away my knight and I don't gain anything. But in this move order that I played knight to c3, now it's very important to play the move d6, because we're playing this idea, because now if bishop to e3 happens, then we could have this idea, knight to g4. We're attacking the bishop without being challenged with the queen. So now the queen, this move queen to g4 is not working, and now I think I could have a really decent game. So but here in the continuation my opponent tried f3, and now it's time to play this correct move order. Now we play knight to d4, because after queen to d4 we're playing bishop to g7. Now after move bishop to e3 that my opponent played, now I played kingside castling. And notice now in this move order my opponent has to lose an extra tempo, because he's moving now again the queen to d2. So it's a little bit different. Let's go back to this moment. So if we play bishop to g7 immediately without playing this d6 and knight to d4 idea, then our opponent then we can go maybe kingside castling. So as we said, knight to g4 doesn't make sense, and now opponent can play this f3 idea like usually in the Maroczy bind. And now this knight to d4 doesn't make sense, because the queen doesn't have to take, and now he can take out with the bishop, and he has again a full control the center of the board. So this doesn't make sense. So as I said, this is now the correct move order. So first, after move knight to c3, we're playing d6, bishop to e3 doesn't make sense because we played knight to g4. So as I said, after f3, now we take, and my opponent loses an extra tempo, you see, with the move queen to d2, because now there was a threat maybe to play knight to g4, discover the attack, and then to grab the bishop on e3. So here, after move queen to d2, I played a5, because this move is very important, at least in my opening preparation, because it's an anti-Yugoslav attack system. Because if you're familiar maybe with the Yugoslav attack, your opponent maybe could try queenside castle, and then he could go g4, h4, h5, bishop to h6, so he could maybe try this Yugoslav attack idea against you, then he could maybe deliver checkmate even in an early stage of the game. So that's why this move a5 is preventing this idea, because I would immediately play a4, then afterwards even a3 if possible. So I would attack him much faster than he would attack me with the potential g4, h4, h5 move. I hope you realize what I'm trying to say. So basically, we're playing this hyper accelerated dragon Sicilian style in order to avoid the Yugoslav attack. So this is the main goal. I've explained these ideas in my whole series. So as I said, we're playing just this idea to avoid this annoying f3, g4, h4, h5 attack, so this annoying Yugoslav attack. So that's why I think I would be much faster in this attack, although the evaluation is about equal. But as I said, I would love to play now this position, because now I would play a3, and even if my opponent prevents this idea with the move a3, still I can go queen to a5. He could maybe launch a flank attack, but I would have now, I think, a decent setup. He could go king to b1, but look at this, this pawn is weak because he played a3, I played a4. He cannot even support the c4 pawn, and now all of a sudden I'm the one that I'm attacking. He's now, I think, on the defensive side, and that's the beauty, I think, about this line, because you don't want to be, of course, on the passive side. So I think this a5 move idea is perfectly fine. So he played b3, he prevented this, but now with the move b3, he already told me something, that he's not going to castle queenside, because now castling queenside would be, of course, a suicide, because there are so many structural weaknesses here on the queen side. So we have bishop to d7, rook to c1, bishop to c6. This is the maneuver that we use many times in the Maroczy bind, because if your opponent plays now knight to d5, this could be an idea in the Maroczy bind structures. Then we simply take out bishop to d5, c takes d5, then we can play knight to d7, and we could also play something like b6, knight to c5, and we would have, I think, cool control of the dark square. So that's why here in the continuation of the game, my opponent tried bishop to e2, preparing now kingside castling, and now played this common maneuver here with a knight to d7, knight to c5, and with the idea to play then b6 in order to have a really nice centralized grip here on dark squares, in order to control further the dark square. So the problem, I think, always for white in these types of structures is a little bit this bad bishop on e2, because it's blocked out by this light square pawn structure. So that's why I wouldn't even mind, as I said, even my opponent, even if he tries bishop to d5, I would take it out immediately, or you can still kick it away maybe with e6. That's not the point, but the point is that I think even if you trade it off, that white would continue, as I said, with a slightly bad piece in the continuation of the game. So in the continuation, after knight to d7, my opponent castled. I played knight to c5. He tried rook to c2. He's trying now to play sort of a maneuver in order to get maybe the rook on d2 and also this other rook on d1, because he could probably make maybe sort of an attack on the d file. The problem for me is that I don't have good squares for the queen. The only good squares that I could have maybe for the queen is the square b6. If I play queen to c7, then maybe this knight to b5 idea would work, because maybe I would place the queen on the same file where already the rook is. So the basic goal of the move rook to c2 is, as I said, to create maybe a rook battery on the d file, and maybe then to break through slowly here with some f4 e5 ideas. So this could be very unpleasant. So I played now a very tricky idea that's common for the Maroczy bind structure. It's now the move e6. My opponent continues the pressure with the move rook to d1, and now comes a tricky idea, bishop to e5, protecting the pawn on d6. And it seems so that you cannot protect your d6 pawn, because bishop to knight to b5 could be an idea, but now you have this one. This is now a trap that I played many times, and it's working really in a beautiful way, because if your opponent tries here g3, then you have this one, bishop to g3, h takes g3, queen to g3, and now if your opponent plays something like king to f1, you have this one. Look at this, knight to e4, after f takes e4, bishop to e4 is of course a beautiful checkmate. Even if if your opponent escapes here to f1, still this knight to e4 idea is working, because after f takes e4, here you could play f5, and look at this. If your opponent passes through, if he is not allowing you to open the f file, then you have this one, bishop to g2, your opponent has to step back. Now we play bishop to h3, and it's now a checkmate here on g2. So as I said, even if your opponent maybe, let's go back to this critical moment, even if after f5, if you now place this one, then of course rook to f5 is going to happen, and this is now completely destruction here. It's even, I think, a forced checkmate. So in the game you could also try maybe this idea queen to e1, but it doesn't matter. F takes e4 is going to happen. So again, we're opening the file much faster than white can defend. So this is now really a dirty trap that you should know. After move knight to b5, whenever your opponent is leaving the protection of the e4 and the f3 square, now you go this one. Again, h3 doesn't make sense. You get just the queen here, and again you have some dangerous checks. So as I said, after move g3, it's very important to notice this tactical idea with the move knight to e4 and then followed with f5, or whatever your opponent does. Knight to e4 is simply working. So after move bishop to e5, my opponent tried queen to e1, and this was now a good choice because he's controlling here the square h4. He's not allowing me this outpost of the queen. Many times you play this queen to h4 outpost and you create really some deadly threats on dark squares. So the problem also in these types of structures that a potential f4 is not working, because you get this one, bishop to c3, queen to c3, and then knight to e4 comes even with the tempo. You will have maybe some dark square problems, but I think with f5, h6, king to h7, rook to f7, you could solve all of your positional problems, and the outpost of the knight is simply, I think, too much to handle. After move f5, probably your opponent will give up maybe the light square bishop for your centralized knight. So as I said, it will be then an opposite color bishop, maybe a middle game, but I think in slightly favor for black. So although white is so far a bishop pair, but I think this is defendable on dark squares because still you have good defensive resources. As I said, f5 and rook to f7 could be an idea to protect at least the g7 square. So here in the continuation, after move queen to e1, I played queen to e7, because now the threat was of course bishop to c5 and I would lose the queen. So after move queen to e7, my opponent tried bishop to f1, and now I played maybe a slightly inaccurate move. I played the move f5, and I wanted to now create dynamics, because when I calculate now this position, I thought, okay, my opponent has already played with the bishop once, he has played already 2-3 times with the queen, he already lost some time in order to get the setup. It's time to break the setup, and I played f5 immediately, although the engine, for instance, suggests this move g5 to get further grip on dark squares, and then with f6, h6 to control the dark squares, maybe king to g7 to have a really centralized grip. But I played much more aggressively. I played the move f5. My opponent took, e takes f5, rook to f5, and here knight to e2. And from this point on, I realized that my opponent has the serious threat knight to d4, and I calculated this. I played now rook from a to f8, and my opponent should have probably played the move knight to d4. This is now the best suggested line by the top engine, and I calculated simply this. I would have played here bishop to d4 after e5. If my opponent would have gone to f2, then I would probably play e4, and I would have a breakthrough here with these two pieces, with the rook activity on the f file, and I think I could have a solid game. But here my opponent could have also, if the line would have been like this, he could have taken maybe the knight on c5, then I have d takes c5, and the problem is that I have this isolated pawn, but I calculated after move rook to e2 that I still could have this move e4, and after f takes e4 I could take the bishop. But what I didn't know and what I didn't calculate, and this was probably my mistake, that here he has this one, bishop to d3, he has this intermediate attack, and then the game should be like this, rook to f4. After rook to e2, I have to play something like rook to d4. This is just suggested line by top engines. Now after rook to e5, now I can play queen to d8 attacking. Still this is defendable of course with bishop to c2, but because of the dark weaknesses, okay, I lost the pawn, but still I could have maybe some chances to make something out of this. Probably I would battle for a draw because I'm a down opponent. So but I like also my position because especially of this dark diagonal. So as I said, it's weird. I really missed something here, so I have to say it, I have to be honest, because knight to d4 should have been played, and then I would have played probably bishop to d4, and as I said, e5 with the idea e4. But I'm not sure if even Milan would have seen everything on the board, but it was now really the critical moment of the game, because my opponent tried now knight to g3, and that's the move that I wanted him to play, because this move is really huge blunder, because the idea, the whole concept of the move queen to e1 in order to cover the square h4 is allowing me now to play queen to h4 immediately, and now I have really a dirty attack here. So whatever you do, for instance, if you try knight to f5, then of course we take first, and then after king to f2 we can here play rook to f5. Even if you try to escape, for instance, on e2, then still we have bishop to f3 is working, and you cannot take, you see, because of this ideas on the second rank. So it's a completely devastating position for white. So after move queen to h4, my opponent tried bishop to e2, so he wanted to create some breathing spaces, but I found now again a new move, rook to h5. So even if he would have played something like bishop to f2, this is not working, because still I have rook to h5, and you see now knight to h5 is not working, because now queen to h2 is checkmate immediately, because you have taken the square here. Even if you, I don't know, play something like h3 in order to somehow lock the h file, then I have rook to g3. I'm continuing the pressure, and even if you try some discovery attacks, look at this, I have queen to f4. Even if you cover yourself with the move g3, I have this one. So it's again completely lost. So even if you try, I don't know, knight to g3, I would give up, I think, the rook here for two minor pieces. This would be probably much better continuation here for black, especially because also of the dark square problems in front of the king. So this is simply not working. So as I said, here you have knight to h5, you lose simply the battle on h2. So after move queen to h4, my opponent tried bishop to e2, so he didn't play bishop to f2. He tried to create some breathing spaces for the king, but now I played rook to h5 anyway, because I thought that if he takes that, still I can take the pawn on h2. So he took knight to h5, I played queen to h2, we have king to f1, and now after queen to a8, h8, pardon me, he has to cover with the move bishop to g1, and I took now with the pawn, and this was the correct choice. If you take with the queen, then I think he could have maybe escaped with bishop to c5, I don't know, d takes c5. It was very important for me to paralyze the bishop here, to not allow this bishop to move, because it's a really bad piece anyway. So I didn't want to that he trades off maybe this bad piece for my good knight on c5, which could be used maybe in the attack. So that's why I took with the pawn, and it was really the correct choice when it comes to computer evaluation. So I'm down the exchange, but I have now perfect attack. My opponent tried here to escape from this by playing the move bishop to d3. He's trying now to create an escape route for the king. He's trying to escape from this attack, but I continue with bishop to h2. I forced him again to do something. He has to play now queen to f2 in order to defend, and I found this tactical shot, bishop to f3, g takes f3, and for rook to f3, this is now completely lost, because after king to e2, I have now the opportunity to take. I took the queen, we have bishop to f2, I played queen to g2, now with the idea to play bishop to g3 to continue the pressure. In the continuation, we have king to e1, and after move knight to d3, rook to d3 in this position, my opponent resigned, because I could have played queen to e4, and then the game would lead into something like this. King to d2 has to be played, then I would probably play bishop to f4. After bishop to e3, I would have played bishop to e5, and now I just pushed the pawn, and I think this is completely winning because of this extra pawn. So the evaluation is here +8 for black. So I as I said, it was a huge mistake to play this move knight to g3, knight to d4 should have been played. I have to say this was now the critical moment. But everyone makes mistakes. I also lost some games that I probably should not have lost. I won some games that I probably should not have won. But I think I played still in a decent level. Although, let's go back to this opening theory. F5 should not have been played. This is not the correct move. Here I should have played G5. keeping this grip. And now maybe with, I don't know, f5, e takes f5, then f4, this could be maybe some kind of an idea to create to create this breakthrough. So okay, I hope that you enjoyed this game. Interesting ideas of the Maroczy bind against the hyper accelerated rank Sicilian. If you want to, as I said, study this hyper accelerated rank Sicilian from Black's perspective, please check out my whole series in which I've explained you the most important strategical and tactical ideas of this opening. And if you like this content, don't forget to subscribe to my channel. See you soon with some more videos, and chess is the best, of course.